hostess. All right, so my name is Matt Koch. I am in the soil gas business. The soil gas you guys are familiar with is Radon, but we also deal with man-made chemicals. I kind of got into this business a roundabout way. A long time ago, I was a physics major at Georgia Tech and didn't really like that, and I went into many other things and had numerous careers. One of the careers I had was as a home inspector, and I did that for 7 or 8 years and inspected lots and lots and lots of houses. And with that, I got introduced to radon because in real estate transactions, sometimes people test for radon. It is becoming more and more part of the culture of a real estate transaction, but it is certainly not required in Georgia, nor does everyone do it. But I bought a continuous monitor because as a newbie, it was an opportunity for me to put it out, make a little bit of money while I was trying to build my kind of book of business as a home inspector. I was lucky enough to have a friend who was a subprime mortgage broker, and 9 months before the market crashed, he told me to within a week of when it was going to crash. He knew it was going to crash. And he's like, you know, you need to do something else for another source of income. And so I'm like, I'll become a radon mitigator. Not thinking through the whole thing of it really depends on the real estate transaction to drive a lot of our business, but paid the bills. I started my company in July of '08. The first 6 months we put in about 16 systems, and it was me and other home inspectors. I would call them up, I got a job, who wants to work? I'm paying cash. But I built, I think, a very successful business based on taking care of clients, taking great care of clients. And it got to the point I couldn't keep up anymore. When I finally sold my company 8 years later, we were doing about 20 installs a week versus 17 in 6 months. And I've learned a lot, right? To become a mitigator or measurement person, you take an online course for 2 days and you're an official, you're a professional. Didn't really teach me a whole lot. I kind of taught myself everything I know. Being inquisitive and from that kind of engineering background. So after I sold my company, I kind of took a hiatus and I've done a lot of training. I'm particularly in training on radon measurement. Although I certainly could teach on mitigation because I'm pretty familiar with it, I just really teach on radon measurement. Okay, so radon in homes. How many of you here have tested your home for radon?
Many years ago.
Many years ago.
What is radon?
What is radon? Do you all know what radon is?
That's a good question.
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, tell me. So, basically, radon is a radioactive gas. It is a naturally occurring radioactive gas. It is everywhere you go, anywhere in the world, except if you're out in the middle of the ocean, you're going to be exposed to some level of radon. And where it comes from is in the soil are all kinds of elements, including some that are radioactive. Radioactive elements are unstable, and to try to become stable, they decay. And what starts as uranium. Uranium is the highest naturally occurring element that's radioactive, and it decays, and then it keeps decaying until it finally ends up as lead. Lead is actually the stable state of uranium. Between those two, at some point it becomes radium, and then when the radium decays, it turns into a gas. It's an inert gas, which means it doesn't interact with anything, it doesn't react with anything, it's just hanging out, waiting to decay again. It decays back into a solid, and wherever it is, it stays. But as an inert gas, there's nothing keeping it there. So it's moved by two primary forces. It's moved by pressure gradient and concentration gradient. So it's all coming from the ground, and there's relatively speaking none in the air. So it just comes out of the ground because it's trying to equalize. So it's coming around out of the ground everywhere. If it was green and smelled like sulfur, everybody would know about radon and everybody would care. And you'd see there's a little spot coming out of there, and there's a little spot coming out of there, and a little spot coming out of there. It's not going to be uniform across a piece of property or underneath a house. If you think about if none of these houses were here, but everybody had a lot and they determined it was gold, and everyone, that was your claim. Not everybody's going to strike it rich. Some people are going to do really well, some people aren't going to get anything. It's the same kind of thing with the radium in the soil. It's not uniform, and even across a house, it is not consistent and uniform. And it's certainly not consistent house to house. Now that being said, there are certainly areas that the area, generally speaking, has a lot higher concentration of radon in homes or in the soil. So what happens, this radon is created and the earth is coming out of the ground, it gets trapped underneath the house. And it gets trapped in concentration. Most houses, the heavy concentration under the slab might be 1,000 picocuries. A picocurie is just a measurement. But that's a lot. In the indoor, the EPA has set a maximum threshold of 4 picocuries per liter. It's a concentration. And one thing to understand is 4 picocuries is not anything but an arbitrary line in the sand. It's not a health-based number. When they first discovered that there was radon in homes, there's a gentleman by the name of Stanley Watrous. He's kind of infamous or famous in the radon industry because he kind of kicked it all off. Stan was working on a nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania. And he kept setting off the alarms when there's the alarms when you're coming and going into the power plant. He kept setting the alarms off. Now, the thing is, the plant was under construction. There was no radioactive material there. So they figured they had faulty sensing equipment. So they got new stuff, kept setting it off. And they're like, what's going on here? So they went to his house and he had really high radon in his house, like 6,000 picocuries, which is really high. And so they discovered, hey, we have this radiation in homes, maybe we should find out more about it. So they've done some research, and there's been a lot of research, and they determined, hey, you have this radiation in your house. Like I said, not a health-based number. When they first discovered that, they said, we need to come up with some threshold to impact public health. And the reason is, you've got this radioactive gas, you're breathing it in. Now, if you have high levels of radon in your house, is it going to kill you? No, unless it does, right? Well, you go outside without sunscreen and you get a sunburn, is that going to kill you? Well, if you had one ionizing ray hit one cell and it become mutated, and some point down the line it turned into cancer, and then they were not able to take care of it, and you died from melanoma, which like 9,000 people a year died, going outside on a sunny day without sunscreen killed you. Okay, it's managed risk, it's calculated risk. So you are going to be exposed to higher levels of radiation in your home than you would outside. Best analogy I can give you is, you go to the dentist to get an x-ray, do you put a lead shield on? Yes. If you don't, are you going to die? No. But so why do you put the shield on? Because you know you're going to be exposed to a dose of radiation that you don't have to. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. It's, do I honestly believe radon can cause lung cancer? It's radioactive decay in your lungs. Okay, y'all make your own decision on it, but I just don't think enough radioactive decay going off in your lungs could be a good thing. So the 4 is not a health-based number, completely arbitrary. When all this came about, there was no radon industry. There were no measurement professionals, there were no mitigation professionals. They said, we need to do something for public health. Let's set a standard. And they're like, kind of did some testing, and they said, okay, the average level in homes across the United States is 1.3 picocuries. So what number can we set that we can impact public health? Well, if they set it at 6 picocuries, there's going to be not nearly as many homes at 6 as there is at 4, so they wouldn't necessarily have the impact on public health. If they made it 3, there are a lot more homes above 3 than there are above 4. All of a sudden, public health crisis, and hey, we don't have anyone to measure or to mitigate. What do we do? So they created a problem with no solution. So that's where they came up with 4. Canada they measure differently. Theirs is 5.2, right? We measure in picocuries per liter. The rest of the world measures in becquerels. 100 becquerels is 2.6 picocuries per liter. So Canada is 200 becquerels, or 5.2. World Health Organization is 2.6, or 100 becquerels. All of them are arbitrary numbers. Now the crazy thing about it is...
So you said 200 becquerels is 5.2
picocuries per liter.
Right.
Picocuries per liter. And you know, it's just a matter of choice, what's going on. Now, if we were to measure radon, we're measuring the radioactive decay. If the radon level is 100, our testing device is going to be pretty accurate. Remember, we're measuring a random event at really low scale. Once you start getting at really low levels, your margin of error is huge because there's just so few sampling data. And so the lower you are, the more inaccurate it is. So if I'm testing and I'm below 4, and I place two tests side by side, they only have to be within like 67% relative percent difference to be considered accurate. You could have a 1 and a 3, and that's accurate. Even though they're way far off, not really. You're at such low scale that that's pretty close. So what is 4 picocuries per liter is 2 radioactive decays per minute per liter of air. And your lungs have about 4 liters of air in them. So at 4 picocuries, you have 8 radioactive decays per minute going off in your lungs. But over the course of a day or a week or a month or a year, you're talking tens of thousands of radioactive decays. Probably not going to cause any problem. So what happens, this radioactivity decays, and when it decays in your lungs, it shoots off an alpha particle, very powerful, and it's going to hit a cell. One of 3 things happens. It kills the cell just fine. Cells replenish themselves all the time. It damages the cell, and it either repairs itself correctly or repairs itself incorrectly. If it repairs itself incorrectly and keeps replicating, then you have a mutated cell. There's a specific gene, it's the P51 gene, and if it hits that, that's the gene that turns itself off if it becomes cancerous. Now you have a place in your lungs that's not resistant to cancer. So for people who smoke, it's kind of a multiplicative effect, right? You're constantly putting carcinogens in your body, and you're constantly creating places in your body that are not resistant to cancer. So it's not like 2 + 2 or 5 + 5 is not 10, it's 5 × 5 is 25. The risk is 9 times as much for smokers for that reason. So the testing for radon. Now, the interesting thing, I told you about Stanley. Okay, so remember, radon's an inert gas. It's floating around. It's not going to stick to Stanley's clothes when he walks into the nuclear power plant. So how is he setting off things in the nuclear power plant? Well, what happens with radon, and this is the crazy part, radon is really not a health risk. Okay, it's an inert gas. Can't hurt anybody. So when it decays, that it's a problem, right? It's when it decays and it shoots off an alpha particle, it's no longer radon, and we've got this alpha particle that's ejecting. The alpha particle is the powerful thing that'll get you. So let's just say there's 100 picocuries per liter in this room. Radiation has a half-life, that is a period of time over which half of it is gone. So if we had 100 picocuries in here, radon's half-life is 3.8 days. 3.8 days later, we're down to 50, 3.8 days later, down to 25, etc., etc. So with a half-life that long, odds are not going to decay in your lungs. Most often it's going to decay in the air. It's not going to hurt you. But when it decays, it turns back into a solid. Now that solid is electrostatically charged, and they stick to all that particulate that you see floating in the air. So when you see light streaming through a window, all that stuff floating through the air, once the radon decays, it decays into, it happens to be polonium, it sticks to that. Well, polonium's half-life is 20 minutes. And then it decays into another product, and then another product, and then it actually goes back to polonium. And the half-life of the second polonium is in milliseconds. So those are much more likely to decay in your lungs. So you breathe in that particulate, it lodges to your lungs, and now boom, 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 radioactive decay. So it's really the decay products that come after radon where the most health risk is from. So you can actually decrease your dose exposure by removing the amount of particulate in the air, by keeping fans running and using electrostatic filter and a HEPA filter. And you can lower the amount of radon decay products in the air. So even at the same radon level, your actual dose exposure to radiation will be much lower. So radon is kind of like the potential of exposure. The radon decay product, that's measured in working levels, that's your dose. That's your actual received dose. So in some places that are really hard to mitigate, you can effectively, if you cut the amount of particulate in the air in half, you cut the actual amount of dose exposure that you're going to have in half. So it can make a big difference. So people who are into cleaning your air, it's a good thing. It's a really good thing. Okay, so we got this radon that's there under your house. So why does it come in your house, right? It doesn't have any reason to come in your house except for concentration and pressure. Well, the way we build houses, we have higher pressure in the soil than we do in the house, or a lower pressure in the house than in the soil. So the pressure gradient is in. So this inert gas just comes in. We build houses for energy efficiency. Energy efficient is radon inefficient. When houses were really leaky, didn't have as much radon problem. Number one is the pressures were not applied as acutely because we had a leaky envelope and we had more air changes, more dilution. But we build houses very tight now for energy efficiency, which keeps the radon in. So it comes in and it can't get out, right? And what will happen is, let's just say we have high levels of radon, we want to lower the levels. People go, oh, just open your windows. Radon level is probably going to go down. Not necessarily, but probably. Depends on which windows you open, on which side of the house, and which way the wind's blowing, because it's all about pressures. But let's just say you do that, we evacuate all the air out of the house, outdoors like 0.4 picocuries. Close the house up. 12 hours later, we're coming right back to where we were. So in real estate, you'll have real estate agents will call and they'll go, but the house was vacant for a year. Doesn't matter. 12 weeks, days, months, years. Once it hits equilibrium, it doesn't keep building up. It builds up till it reaches a point the same amount is decaying as is coming in. It takes 12 hours. So it's really simple stuff. So it comes into your house. So the only way to know how much radon you have is to test, right? And the real tragic thing about all this is short-term tests are accurately inaccurate, right? You've got a short-term test kit, and it's going to tell you what happened in the location you tested at the time you tested. And the size of the sensor in there is like the size of a walnut. So you're going to make a judgment on what the radon level is in your house based on what happens in a space the size of a walnut over the course of 48 hours. And if you place two of them side by side, they're not going to be the same number. One might be a 3, one might be a 5. Now they're probably going to be closer than that. But a 3 and a 5, that is not unusual. You know, the average is going to be something. If we placed 100 tests out, and let's just say the average in this room was 10. We placed 100 tests out. There's going to be a distribution curve. Statistically, 10% of them are going to be 10. 98% are going to be plus or minus 25%. Most of them are going to be between 7.5 and 12.5. And you're going to have a couple of outliers. It's just statistical probability. So, the best way to test is to do a long-term test, which is, of course, over a year. And you don't have to keep your doors and windows closed. When you do a short-term, you're kind of wanting to get a marker of potential, to get an idea if maybe the radon level in your house might be high. So you keep all the doors and windows closed, and you place it in the lowest area of your house that you live. Real estate, the lowest potentially livable area. So if you have an unfinished basement, you don't use it, you're not going to be exposed to that. We're really trying to find out our exposure level. Long-term test is always better. And like I bought a home monitor that you can have, that you can buy, and they have an app on their phone. I think they have one. I love it. My level in my house, what is it today? It averages like 2.3, 2.4, but there are periods of time when over a course of a couple days, it might be 6. But over the course of a week or a month or a year, it's low. It's also possible the other thing works, right? You test short term and it's at 3 and you go, oh, it's great. Well, you might have been on the low side of the distribution curve, and also it changes hourly and monthly and weekly, and it's driven pretty much by environmental factors. When it rains a lot, radon levels go up. When we have heavy winds, radon levels go up. Okay, those things make a difference. The pressures and the rain caps the soil, and the radon can't get out, it gets drawn into the house. So you all should test. Everyone should test. The biggest thing is, and I get a lot of people, they don't want to know. I get that. But let's just say your house does have high levels of radon. Some point in time, you were going to sell that house. If when you sell that house, that person tests, and it tests high, you're going to probably pay for that mitigation system, and you will have received no benefit from it. So you can make a choice of not testing and not doing anything about it. Don't ask, don't tell. Or you can test, and if you have a problem, then you can go, okay, maybe we'll address it. Or maybe not. That's your choice. But then you at least know. But then, of course, if you test and you know, when you sell your house, you kind of have to disclose, we did a test and we have high levels of radon. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of the radon coming in and testing. your levels are going to be highest in winter. So testing now is good. Testing in winter would be better. You can buy long-term test kits which you put out for 3 to 6 months or 9 months, and they cost like $25. My recommendation is put it out in fall and leave it through fall through winter, and that's going to give you your worst case scenario, but of how you normally live. Where you can open windows and doors, you live the way you live. It will tell you what your exposure is over a period of time. Now let's just say you have radon and you need to fix it. 2 big misconceptions about mitigating, right? If you've seen a mitigation system, it's a pipe and there's a fan on it, right? And so the general thought most people have is, here's a pipe and a fan, let me find a place I can stick it, where it will work good for me, I'm gonna put it there and we're gonna turn it on and it's gonna work. And in 90% of the country, that's true, but that doesn't work that way in Atlanta. We have very impermeable soil. We have clay, you can't suck through clay. If we have permeable soil, you can suck through clay, great. We also, under all of our load-bearing walls, are footers, and so it divides the basement up into cells. The second concept that people always think is that the radon system is sucking the radon out and exhausting it out above the roof. That's not what it's doing. It's stopping the radon from coming in. If it's coming in because the pressure gradient is this way, I'm trying to change the pressure gradient to this way. So I want to draw enough air out that I can create a low pressure onto the slab, so it keeps the radon from coming in. And when you do that, it works. We unfortunately here in Georgia, most of the radon that's in your house most likely is coming from within 3 to 6 feet. It's not coming from deep under the ground. I hear this all the time. Oh, I live in Stone Mountain. There's high level, this huge hunk of granite. Granite, you're right. Granite might have some stuff in it. It's very, very, very dense. So let's just say in the middle of Stone Mountain, there's this massive nugget of radium. It's just putting off ridiculous amounts of radon. And it takes 500 million years for it to get out. Its half-life is 4 days. Not a lot of it's making out. And then it's a mile underground. It's got to come through all that clay. It's not going to do it. It's with 3 to 6 feet. Sometimes though, if there's a crack or a fissure under your house that goes to a cavern under the earth, it might be 100,000 picocuries in the cavern. And the day-night cycle brings it up and down, and up and down. And then you get a natural cycle. It's called a diurnal cycle. And people who have one, if you do a long-term test with a continuous monitor, there's no doubt in the world they have a diurnal cycle, because their highs are 24 hours apart and their lows are 24 hours apart. Highs are at sunrise, lows are at sunset. And the highest one I've seen, there's a neighborhood that has really bad diurnal cycles. Was an average of 250 and it cycled between 150 and 350 every day. So when they were sleeping, it was 350 picocuries, which is really high. But the bigger they are, the harder they fall, right? The only reason it's coming in is because there's a source in pressure. So if you can overcome those pressures, and in that case, I do want to suck the radon out, right? Most houses, I'm not trying to suck the radon out. If I got 100,000 picocuries, I want a suction point right on there. I want to suck out 100,000 picocurie air. It's interesting, house I went to 2 days ago to mitigate. When we mitigate, what we do is we drill holes through the slab and I measure the radon level under the slab, so I know where my source is. And we found a spot, I've got a thing on here, it was over 8,000 picocuries under the slab. In a spot this big. It was the safe room underneath the stairs, 8,000 picocuries. And when I measured it on a pressure differential gauge, it was 9,000ths of an inch of pressure positive, which is ridiculously high. So to me, that has a chasm. That's why it's that high, and that's why I have that much pressure, because I have an air channel somewhere working on there. But when we put in a system, our goal is to create low pressure. If I can do that, I know it's going to work, and that's what we did. We also, in Georgia, we make our foundation walls out of stuff that comes out of the ground. And so some houses, some amount of radiation in the house is actually coming right out of the foundation walls. It's made of something that's slightly radioactive. I have a house I just came back from, I went to this morning. We have a system in it, it's doing great, and their levels are still 5. And so I went back and man, we have pressure everywhere. So I did what's called an emanation test and seeing how much is coming out of the wall. And sure enough, there's like 50 picocuries per square foot of wall every hour coming into that basement. So it doesn't matter what I do under the slab, I'm never going to be able to address that. And the solution to it is just adding fresh air. Right? We build houses too tight. If that house had more air changes, they would not have a radon level of 5. They would have a much lower radon level. And that's using a piece of mechanical equipment to basically like having windows open. You're basically just diluting the air in your basement mechanically, consistently.
So does the age of the house have a difference? Because you mentioned that the new houses are tight.
If you
And
have
you
a
have-
1950s house and you were to knock it down and build the exact same floor plan now, it's going to have higher radon levels on your new house than your old one because of the way we build houses.
Right, so, but the older houses, so if you look in Sandy Springs and you go into 50s and 60s house, it probably has less radon than a comparable house.
Potentially, but one of the highest ones I've ever did was a house in Sandy Springs on a crawl space that was at over 50 inside the house, right? The thing is, it's coming from the soil, so it doesn't matter on that.
Was the crawl space sealed up, like the vents closed and that sort of thing?
That don't matter, I really don't.
Where do you put the test if you've got the a slab?
Up above it.
So on the main living
Main floor.
space.
That one was interesting. It had a split level. It had 2 crawl spaces. It was, and the crazy thing was, the radon wasn't really good. Well, a lot of radon was coming from the crawl space, but it was actually coming from the adjacent garage, right? So you figure like a garage is adjacent to your basement. You got a cap, you got soil. It comes up. I can create all the low pressure in the world down here, so my pressure gradient between the basement and the soil is good. I haven't changed this one. And once we had to put a separate system in just in the garage, and it took care of it. You know, if we come in and do work and the radon levels don't go down sufficiently, it's because there's a source that we're not impacting. If the source is from the soil, we just have to find a way to get low pressure on that source. If the source is the concrete, then you have to put in an air exchange system to deal with it. Yes.
What is the cost of an average mitigation system, regardless of the size of house? What's the general range?
If I can come in and just put a single suction point, come up, out the side of the house, put a fan, go up, run the electric and stuff, we're at about $1,750. That's higher than a lot of areas of the country. There's areas of the country, and there's even a company here you can call that, depending on how busy they are, will give you a quote of $850 to $1,400. You can tell how busy they are by their prices. If they're busy, they're $1,400. If they're not, they're $850. And they will call you relentlessly saying, I'll give you $100 off if you let us come tomorrow. Okay? They use kind of like a very low quality material. Doesn't mean that they're not successful, but they don't spend the time designing the system. So when I come into a house, the first thing I do is I drill holes through all the floor. I measure the radon level everywhere. And then I go to the place I want to put my system. I core a hole through the slab. I put a vacuum on it. And I go to each of my test holes and I say, when I apply vacuum here, do I create low pressure here? And so I can design the system to work. In this particular house, we have a system in. I've got good pressure over almost all the house. I don't have good pressure underneath the safe room, and that's where the hot spot in the basement is, the hottest spot, and I'm not getting pressure there. So our levels went down. They're not down enough that everyone's happy. That's because we know there's a source we're not touching, right? I mean, it's really straightforward. It's not complicated. Now, do they have some emanation? Sure. Everyone has some here. Most houses, it's not much. You know, it's probably not 4 picocuries coming out of the wall. I have houses that it was 6 picocuries coming out of the wall, and the only way to get rid of it was fresh air. Probably not most houses, though. So older houses, ultimately, radon is about 3 things. It's about source strength, source strength, permeability of the soil, the pressures that are being applied from the house to the soil or vice versa, and the pathways by which they're being applied. So they all kind of work together, but just because a house is old and leaky does not mean it won't have high levels of radon. It certainly could, and if you tighten that house up, it's going to have really high levels of radon.
Now, if we could get USGS maps where we can look at the underlying minerals underneath.
You know, I don't think it'll work because it's so different. There's a guy who did a study in DeKalb County looking at ground level gamma radiation to determine if there was a correlation between ground level gamma and radiation or the radon levels in homes.
Mm-hmm.
Not really. The EPA has radon maps, which kind of show the United States county by county, and they call them into 1 of 3 counties. Zone 1 means a higher probability of having levels above 4, Zone 2 is Zone 3. Those came about in the 80s. They're unbelievably crummy. And the EPA knows they're crummy. And the way we know they're crummy is, well, a couple of things. They're based on very, very little sampling data, like some as low as 1 or 2 tests in a county to come up with these numbers. And they were based on kind of like flyover data looking for uranium mines, because that's kind of the root cause. But they're not accurate. So like Georgia, the University of Georgia has a cooperative extension office that does the radon program. They've been giving out test kits for a long time, or selling them, and they've compiled that data, and they've made a map, which is much more accurate, and it's based on testing data, not some abstract thing. So I was on the board of directors for the National Radon Efficiency Program, and we had a conference in Washington, D.C., and we had the people from EPA in and said, look guys, we really need you to change your maps. They're really inaccurate. So in Metro Atlanta, or in Georgia, there's only 4 counties which are considered Zone 1 counties, and that's Fulton, Cobb, DeKalb, and Gwinnett. Now, if you look at the University of Georgia map, there are a lot of counties that have high levels of radon, and Cobb is not one of them. Cobb should really be a Zone 2. The hot counties start over towards Carrollton. They run over through Atlanta, kind of follow the Chattahoochee River, and go all the way up to Brevard, North Carolina. They follow the Brevard Fault. And the hottest areas in Georgia are up, is it Hall County or is it Henry County? I never remember which one is up, like Flowery Branch.
That's Hall.
Oh, yeah.
Henry's
Hall is
on the
one of
south
the-
side.
Yeah, Hall is one of the highest counties, and it doesn't even show on the map. We do a lot of work up there. Like when someone calls me and says, hey, my levels are 20, I'm like, do you live in Sterling on the Lake? Because that's the subdivision that there's so many high levels. And think about this. You know what backs up, Sterling on the Lake backs up to? Backs up to a quarry, where they're pulling all the granite out of the ground that's used to make aggregate to make the concrete. And they're doing all kind of blasting, which creates cracks and fissures. And so they're taking this stuff, grinding it up, and building your house out of it.
And what do you think about the fact that our neighborhood, the swimming pool is in an old granite quarry? I don't know if you knew that. That, along with all the new construction going on in the neighborhood, do you think that's a good?
I don't know that the new
environment?
construction will affect anything other than you're building houses that have tighter building envelopes, so you can have higher levels. The quarry certainly could. There's another quarry that's over off of near Lordaines, an old quarry, and I've done tons of houses. I mean, just tons of houses in that. There's a little cluster. I mean, a lot of houses. Actually, I did the house that the quarry was in their backyard. It was the coolest thing. There's a waterfall, like this sunken thing. That it was really neat. I'm a big kid. I like stuff like that. But yeah, it goes to the specific geology. And hey, if there's a quarry and they were mining granite and they were blasting, hey, cracks and fissures, those are all bad things to bring the radon in. Okay.
She's gonna stop